in a previous lecture that when Jesus finishes his work in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, after he has judged all of the dead who believed in Jesus and all of those who are alive, the kingdom of Jesus will be made up at that point. In other words, everyone who belongs to his kingdom will be clearly revealed before the universe. And then God's people will be ready to go through the time of trouble that we're going to discuss this afternoon. Now, I'd like to mention 4 common denominators in all of the different scenarios that we're going to take a look at in our lecture today. Number 1, we're going to notice that in every context, God's people go through the tribulation. They go through the time of trouble. They are not taken out before the time of trouble. They go through the time of trouble. Secondly, the faith and patience of God's people is severely tested during this period. They must exercise patience or perseverance. In the third place, they will go through a period of anguish. They will not despair, but there will be anguish. And finally, at the conclusion of the time of trouble, God's people will be delivered. Now, I'd like to begin our discussion of the time of trouble, which begins as soon as probation closes, by turning to Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. I invite you to go there with me. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1. We've looked at this verse before, but I want us to notice 4 details that we find that I consider very important when we study this subject in this particular verse. Let me give you a little bit of context before I mention those 4 main points of Daniel 12 verse 1. Daniel 12 verse 1 has a context, the previous context. In verses 44 and 45 of chapter 11, we find the king of the north coming against God's people. Now you're probably wondering, who is the king of the north? Well, in Scripture, the last power that will oppress God's people is referred to in different names. For example, it's the clay in the feet of the image of Daniel 2. It's the little horn of Daniel 7 and 8. It's the beast of Revelation 13. It's the man of sin of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It's the abomination of desolation in Matthew chapter 24. It is the harlot in Revelation chapter 17. It is the Antichrist in 1 John chapter 2. In other words, all of these names are names that refer to the same power from different perspectives. In Daniel 11, the last enemy of God's people, which we believe to represent the papacy, is referred to as the king of the north. And verse 44 of Daniel 11 tells us that the king of the north will go out to destroy and annihilate many. In other words, he will give a death decree against God's faithful people after the close of probation. I want you to notice Daniel 12 verse 1, the 4 points that I want to underline. It says at that time, that is when the king of the north comes with the intention of destroying God's people, at that time Michael shall stand up. Now, Michael is another name for Jesus. It means who is like God. Now, what does standing up mean? We studied in our last lecture that the standing up of Michael refers to the time when Jesus begins to reign, because his kingdom is made up. In other words, the standing up of Michael is the close of probation. We studied that carefully in our last lecture. So it says at that time when the king of the north goes out to destroy God's people, Michael shall stand up. That means that probation will close. And notice what characteristic this great prince has. It says Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And now notice what's going to happen after probation closes. And there shall be a what? A time of trouble. Does a time of trouble come after probation closes? Absolutely. There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. So I want you to remember that expression once again. There shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And then notice what's going to happen at the end of the time of trouble. It says, and at that time, your people shall be what? Shall be delivered. I want you to remember that word. It's a key word. Your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found what? Written in the book. What is that book? We studied this. The book is the book of life. And what does the book contain? Names. So let me ask you, if those who are in the book are delivered, must God have retained their names in the book during the judgment? Of course. And so the 4 points I want us to notice is, first of all, standing up is the close of probation. Secondly, after probation closes, there's going to be a severe time of trouble. In the third place, God's people are going to be delivered. And in the fourth place, those who are delivered are the ones whose names are written where? In the book. Now, this language, time of trouble, actually comes from another experience in the Old Testament. It comes from Genesis chapter 32. Now, Genesis chapter 32, we're only going to look at the highlights of this chapter. Have you ever heard of the time of Jacob's trouble? Have you ever wondered why it's called the time of Jacob's trouble? Because that's what the time of trouble is called. It's because the time of trouble in Daniel chapter